Okay, so for our fifth and final budget hearing, this is our official public budget hearing for the 27-2018 budget. Why don't we start with the revenues? So if everyone probably recalls, our tax levy.
Please recall for us.
I'll recall for you, okay. So our tax levy for this current year is $13,697. The proposal for the tax levy for next year is $14,275,000. Now again, the tax levy is the portion that the taxpayers actually pay. So the difference there that we're looking at is $578,000 or 4.22% increase. And keep in mind, we will come back to that 4.22 in relation to the appropriations. Boy, do I just feel that all of you heard this once or twice before.
Yeah, even the pictures are the same.
They might be in different slides, so.
Maybe he slipped something in there just to see if we were paying attention.
I did in this next slide.
There's something different in the next slide.
This is new. You all will be happy about this one. There's one or two slides which are different.
Dun, dun,
Giddy.
dun.
Now, this is all good because this is all about what your taxes will be next year. It's a little bit lower than we had anticipated at the last presentation, and I'll tell you why. We looked at a $100,000 home. We looked at a $200,000 home. And again, if you recall, for our 5 municipalities that we have, we mixed all the 5 together. We look at all of the assessments for the 5. We look at the equalization rates for the 5. We put them all together with the taxes, and then that gives their proportional tax share that they actually have to pay. Now, when we did that last time, we had said it's too early in the process to give a final for next year because we don't have all the assessments and we don't have the equalization rates in. So we said best case scenario that we can give is the information that we have. So we used all the 16-17 information for next year's taxes, 17-18. Well, since the last presentation, we did get in the equalization rate. So half of what we need is in for next year. And the new person coming in, it's all set up for them, so all they got to do is put in the new assessments, they're done, and they'll be ready for the presentation.
So, Tom, what's nice
Yes.
about this slide is that if I pull up what we thought was going to happen.
It was higher.
Based on the equalizations from April 5th, that $89.13 was $125.74. So can you talk about that?
So let me put that in some context for you. So again, we have the 5 municipalities, and last time and this time, we are looking at Eden and Eden alone, and the reason why is because Eden makes up the vast majority of the taxpayers. So we took the largest amount of people who are taxed and put that up as example. We could have done it for all 5, but we just took the largest. So what ended up happening between then and now is when the equalization rates came in, several of them dropped. Eden dropped by 1%, but other municipalities dropped even more. And what happens is, generally speaking, all things being equal, if your equalization rate drops, you end up paying more, because basically the state's saying you're not paying your fair share when the equalization rate's below 100, so you got to pay a little more. The fact that the others dropped more than Eden helped Eden, which means Eden taxes aren't going to go up as much, but that does mean on the flip side as well, some of the other municipalities will see a little bit higher of an increase.
$35 less per 100,000.
For Eden.
Right.
Correct. Okay?
So that means that somebody was saying that they were going to be paying about $250 extra next year based on what it was projected. So they're going to be saving approximately $70 off that.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. They're going to be paying more than this current year, but they're going to be saving in comparison to what we thought it would be going up.
At the fifth.
It's not as much as
It's
we
better
thought.
than we thought.
Yes, it won't go up as much as we had anticipated.
Which is good.
But other municipalities will go up more than we had
But
anticipated.
that's not a solid figure.
No, because we still don't have all of the assessments in for all the properties, and that we'll have over the summer. So that last ingredient, and you've heard me say this many times, it's a mix between what we provide, the assessments, and the equalization rate. So it's a
Tom, do
mix
you
between those three.
anticipate that the apartments are going to be in it?
I doubt that at this point, no.
Doubt it.
Because they need to have that information in by March, and, are you talking for Eden?
I am, the ones that's next to Surefine.
Yeah, but they're not done.
But they intend to put people in it this fall.
But it's past the March deadline, which already passed. So,
They
no.
didn't even, they barely bulletproof those.
I
Yeah,
know,
it'll
but
be-
they will be
We're getting
finished,
a hot
it's
dog
amazing.
stand open.
That, yeah.
2 years.
So,
He didn't want to be open last summer.
If you buy a piece of property and we're this far into construction, it would be still appraised at vacant land until the structure is up. So
Correct.
it's probably still.
A couple years out.
Yeah, it's appraised at vacant land, so it'll be assessed next year when they do the assessment, so.
At vacant land until they build.
Right.
Got it.
Yep.
Right, until there is
It's
a,
better down the road.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely, without a
I've
doubt.
seen a couple new houses too in my.
But that doesn't, like you said, that won't increase revenues for us, it'll just,
It'll spread it out a little
Spread it
more.
out more, which is always
So your tax rate won't seem as high.
Still paying a lot.
what's it, they're called shell game.
There are more shells, I guess, for it to go around. So we're still looking, though, at the exact same what we talked last time, and now we can go back to previous presentation, 4.22% or 14,275. We are staying within the tax cap. That has not changed at all. Okay? So overall revenues, again, overall revenues includes not only what taxpayers are paying, but also what we're getting from state and all other funding sources. So this current year, our revenues are 26,369. The proposal for next year is 27,557, a difference of a little more than 1.118 million, or an increase of 4.51%. And again, keep that in mind, because when we talk the spending increase is higher than the revenue increase. Okay, so looking at the appropriations or the spending. We
know-
want, yes,
I wrote a note,
okay?
let me pull it up.
It's always dangerous when you bring
I
that.
know, but I wrote a note. I did, I told Mike that he might as well relax, because he's not going anywhere before 8:05, so these interjections are going to help the time go by faster for you, Mr. Breeden. Bob Lowry, who does an awful lot of analysis of anything to do with budgets and is an advocate for school districts, indicated that this year is the smallest total school aid increase in 4 years and the smallest add-on by the legislature in 5. And also felt that there's an incredible importance of accurate data collection regarding graduation data so they can get their numbers correct, since they're using numbers that are 2 years old in some cases for all this. So. But the smallest add-on in 5 years, in
And
case you hear differently.
and they should also, I don't know if he noted in there, one of the reasons why it is considered to be one of the smallest in years is it's a non-election year. And I have heard that we should see a larger increase next year because, again, it's election cycle, so. Yeah, and I think it was to be expected that it would be a little bit lower because there was no real incentive
Right.
on behalf of the legislators. Okay, so adjustments. I'm going to let Sandy take the next 3 slides.
Yeah. These are new.
Yes.
And replace about 5 slides, so we had you in mind. So rather than trying to explain what has happened since January and then the March and then the April, we just simply gave it to you at the very end. And in terms of reductions, there's the 5th grade class that was by enrollment. Number 2, staffing cuts, which will follow on the next page. Private school placements, that's everything to do with special ed. Those are the kids that get transported mostly to Loguitas.
Yeah, it was one private school placement.
Athletic trainer increase less than we expected it through UB. Pool sound system we're taking care of this year and not putting it into next year's budget. Field trips that are school sponsored, we took out about 6,000 from that there are some that are still sponsored by others. And then the one administrative position that was left vacant with Mr. Graff leaving, that will be filled in 2018, but not this coming year. In terms of add-ons, some things that are new for this coming year based on either things that we've heard through the board, things we've heard from teachers, administrators, and our parents. Because of the capital project and because of the one-on-one initiatives, it's bringing in 34 extra days of a BOCES senior tech, and that's basically because we're moving the entire, everything to do with our infrastructure over. Microcomputer repair technician, that's another person that would be similar to Tebra Howard to work on these one-on-one devices that are coming in. Half of a groundskeeper, that means that that person won't start until the second half of the school year, but their responsibility will be for anything to do with grounds outside, which I believe is a really good add. A 1st grade classroom plus specials. Right now, our numbers for kindergarten enrollment are low, but they were last year as well, so it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I think what I saw come in yesterday, or this past couple days, you sent an enrollment out, Lucinda. Let me try to tap your brain.
Right now, it's right, this current year has stabilized.
Yeah.
But for kindergarten, I only have 73 completed enrollments right now.
So the year before this current year, we were at 79. This year, we went up by 10, exactly 10, and stayed there. We didn't lose it. But this year, we don't have it yet, so it'll be interesting to see. And that's always a conundrum, because we plan on this for this extra fifth kindergarten, and you can't let this person go after you've hired them in August or September, so you just never know. And then again, you could get a load of kids in kindergarten the first week of September. So then a nurse, ideally this will be an LPN. We've been working with the CSEA contract to bring in an LPN. This person would be responsible for riding the bus, filling in for nurses when they're out, when they're at lunch, when they're out sick, when they're on break, when they're off on a field trip. So this is something we're pretty excited about, and was specifically due to many, many parents telling us that they wanted to see it. And then not in the budget is an increased building use based on some changes we made in our fee structure. On the next page, this is not different than before. So we have these reductions, and I'm going to go through and just share with you, just for clarification, because it's the only second time that we're bringing this up, which ones are program and which ones should not be program. The reductions of 2 aides may or may not be the 2 aides anymore, although there's 2 aides in the budget because we did get a new retirement notice yesterday. That half a laborer is really, it's an add-on at half a laborer, because we were going to hire a full laborer, but we brought it down to a half. At the elementary school, no, at the elementary school, we have 1 less elementary. That's due to the loss of that 5th grade classroom, and then also at GLP.
No, that was
They're
AAS.
both at the elementary school.
Wasn't that AAS?
They're both at the elementary school. 1 is AIS and 1 is 5th grade.
Yeah.
And then a 0.5 in terms of special areas because of the loss of the 5th grade. So it's a little bit of art, a little music, a little PE, a little library, a little computer as well. But that's going to be listed later on in business ed. English is a 0.415, which is essentially a little bit over 2.5 classes. That's primarily at the 7th through 12th grade level. Social studies is pieces of 2 people, also at the junior, senior high school. Math is all of 1 person who was part-time. 0.5 is half of 1 person. Technology is a piece of a part-time person. Facts, that's a whole person, 0.33. Administration is Mark Graff's position. Library is due to the 0.07, which would be a little bit of Mr. Clancy at GLP. And then the business ed is a combination, mostly for the junior, senior high school, of 1 teacher. And going back up through these, the loss in program would be AS being done differently and perhaps in a much better way. We believe that the devices are going to help us with that. A loss in program in English, which would be the senior vocational, but the students will be getting those credits out of BOCES. Those are students that are going through VOTEC. In social studies, the electives have not been taught this year. They're also not being taught next year. There's 2 AP courses that will have students in excess of 29. In math, there's no loss in program. In science, there's no loss in program. In technology, there's 1 or 2 half courses that won't be offered. In facts, there's loss in program. In business ed, there are 1 or 2 courses that are not offered. So mostly in the special areas, not the core. Okay.
Okay, so where does that leave us in the big picture for spending? This year's budget is $27,369. Next year's budget proposal is $29,017. Difference is $1,648,000, or again, a 6.02%. Now, if you recall, when I talked about the revenues, obviously, clearly the percentage for the appropriations you're spending is going up quicker than the level for the revenues, which means, of course, we're going to have a deficit budgeting situation. And again, I like to point out, we have not deficit spent yet, but we've been deficit budgeting since I've been here, so. Appropriations versus revenues. And again, we knew this given prior to what we saw from the governor's run. We looked at 29017, 6.02% increase. The revenue 27,557, 4.51. The difference there was 1.46 million at that point. So in closing the gap, we have to take into account what we got as a final from the state legislature with the actual final budget. And anything that you see that has the single star. So foundation aid here, building aid here, transportation aid here, and BOCES aid. That is what we had put in the budget back in January. So that's what we originally had. And as you see, some of them were pretty close to what we ended up getting, and I'll talk a little bit of the difference. So we had budgeted for foundation aid, 6.8 million. That came in at 6,978,000. Or 176,000 more. Great news. Building aid, we had budgeted 1,347. It came in the same, so no difference there. Transportation aid, we had budgeted 1,296,000. It came in at 1,345, an increase of 49,000. Although I do think that is a little bit overestimated at this point. So I would say the number that was set in January is pretty close to the realistic budget. And we had budgeted 1,310,000 for BOCES aid. It came in at 1,321,000, so pretty close to what our estimate was. The difference, though, I want to say that we had put $253,000 into the budget, which was an estimation of the reimbursement, our share for the BOCES capital project. What we're being told is just through delays with the whole capital contract process that we may not see that entire $253,000 in revenues. And if you're taking a look, you could see as little as half of that revenue. So we could lose up to $126,000 what we'd actually budgeted in there. So even though the foundation aid, which is the biggest chunk that we saw at 176, we could lose $126,000 from the BOCES aid, really literally leaving you with the $50,000 net is really what you're talking about. Which is again what we talked about.
Our reimbursement rate on BOCES aid has gone down in the last 4 years. Can you just talk about that for a moment?
It has. So we're in the...
We used to be in the 70s.
We're in the 60s now, mid-60 range, and you're right, it has gone down just a little bit. It's still, for us, a very good deal for us to actually have. So for a service for every dollar spent, we get back about 65 cents on the dollar for aidable services. Now, not everything's an aidable service, but still, it's a smart investment for us.
Okay.
Okay. So again, still looking at this, we had talked about the fact that we had overestimated some of our revenues, probably about the $50,000 range, that having the $50,000 additional in the foundation aid really would offset if that's the case. So, I mean, you're still looking at the 146, and again, you know, conservative me, I still said it gives me a little pause when I see that. That will never change my dying day. Probably we've increased the fund balance and reserves use 46% for the coming year, from 1 million to 1,460,000. A couple of caveats for the board just to keep in mind is that with next year 460,000, well, we actually have 450,000 in that vehicle reserve. If we don't replenish it this coming year, we won't have that to use again next year. So really what you're talking about is you really would only have $1 million to work with next year, not 1.46.
So come July and August, when the board approves the plan for
The reserve
the
placement.
reserve, they should ideally put 460,000 into that reserve.
If you don't want to find yourself behind an 8 ball next year, I would say that's one of the first things you'd want to look at. Yes, absolutely.
And that's just used for equipment like buses and...
Buses and buildings and grounds vehicles, that's all it is used for.
So
That's your
we
second.
can't use that this year for anything else. So if something happens that we go to a contingency situation, that 400 can only be used for vehicles.
Well, when you take a look at the use of the reserve, you wouldn't be able to use the reserve, but you also wouldn't have the expenditure either, so they would offset each other. So you're right, but it'd
It
be...
would just go back into the reserves for next year.
So it's your next slide, so why don't you
Yeah.
flip slides?
Well, his question's a little different than the next slide. So in that particular case, you wouldn't use the reserve, you're right. You wouldn't add the expenditure. They just wipe each other out, but that reserve would remain intact.
Wouldn't buy the buses.
Right,
You wouldn't buy
that's
the
what I'm saying.
correct.
Money would just go
Right.
back into the reserves. We can't use it
Right.
for any general fund expense.
Right.
Correct.
That's what I'm.
Yep.
So it would be there for next year.
Right, I'm just trying to clarify.
Yep, you are right. So, thank you, Mr. Shepherd, a perfect segue into contingent budget. And what does a contingent budget mean for the district? What does it actually look like? Last time we talked in generalities, there were no numbers that were attached to it. Now you can actually see the numbers attached to it. So when you take a look at this, there are 3 areas, if you go to contingent budget, which are affected: administrative, capital, and program. Now, administrative, different than administration, so all support type of functions.
So Barb is administrative.
Barb is administrative, absolutely. Capital, meaning, again, equipment, buildings and grounds type of items, so the buildings and grounds department, those type of items. And program is just what it sounds like, student programming, anything that's related to student programming. When you take a look, in previous years, you've seen a pretty close mix between the 3. But given the fact that this year we have a capital exclusion and our tax levy has gone up significantly because of that exclusion this year, that means the levy can be no more than what it was last year. And when you see an increase of over $500,000 in the levy as opposed to $100,000, which we've seen in past years,
Last year was .93.
I'd have to look at that.
It was
The rate
less,
.93.
it was less than 1%, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't like to commit until I actually see it, but yes, that sounds right. So when you have a larger spread like this, there's only so much you can put into the non-program areas. So 25,000 would come from the administrative portion. 63,000 would come from the capital, so the equipment, buildings and grounds. But the vast majority would come directly from programs, so $488,000. So really what that would mean is if we end up going to a contingent budget, well, let me back up for a second. If the budget does not pass on the 16th, you have a choice. You can go straight to contingent budget. You could go back out for a revote at this exact same amount, or you can go back up for a revote at a different, lesser amount. If you either choose to go right to contingent, or if you went back a second time and failed a second time again and you went contingent, then at this point, the administrative team would have to get back together and figure out how they're going to reduce, I think it's $579,000. They would have to say, what are we going to cut to be in compliance with this right here?
So just for some comparison on that, can you back up
To which slide?
to the chart? That's 594,000.
Yeah, that's a pretty good
So with
comparison.
the exception of 100,000, that's pretty close. And if you go back down, so that's pretty much what it looks like.
So it'd be that all over again,
Yes,
times 2.
minus 100. Right.
No, no.
Because
Well, we still have to cut from administrative, capital. So we need this amount of cut, basically, because this is 594. We need 579.
No,
So,
but that's what I'm saying, take 100 out of this,
Take
and
100
it's
out of
close to your
You're saying the
488.
remainder 488 comes
Right.
from program.
but no, we still need cuts in administration and everything. So this right here, this cut here is not program. This is an administrative cut.
Oh, yeah.
You still need this amount of cuts because this represents all 3
Where would
areas.
the laborer go, administrative,
That's capital.
that's capital.
Yep, so this represents all 3 areas right here. You need this right here, because it is representative of all 3.
This times 2 if you go to.
This times 2, if you ended up going, yes. So that would be a fun meeting to have. There'd be some pacing going on there.
We need to have that meeting in July.
July 6th?
no, I'm thinking July 1st.
Be voted on again in June.
We're not, sorry, Michael. Positive vibes.
Jen says,
I would say this, in In all the history that I've looked at, I don't think I've seen a budget which has been defeated. We passed it roughly, I'm not trying to, our average is 60%, and we're not going out with the supermajority.
Our average is like 61, 62.
I think it's right at 60.
You think it's right at 60?
Unless last year brought it up a little. Last year we were at 60, so if last year's might have brought it up a little.
That'll be good.
60
But we
is
don't
good.
need 60.
No, we need 50 plus .1. I mean,
So our tax warrant this year is 4.22. In 2010-11, it was 5.19. Prior to that, it was 6.15, 6.62, 5.8, 6.98, 6.94, 9.73.
but,
Those were all prior to the 2%.
exactly,
Yes.
there is a world of difference between
Yeah.
those years and now.
Yep.
Well, the perception is 2%, and it's just so,
But we're still within the legal.
Yes.
We are, and that's part of it right there. Do people understand and realize its legal limit and what that means? So we need everyone just to go out and let people know what it is.
So did all of you have a chance to see, and maybe not because I sent out
I did. I went
the
down.
proof
oh, yeah, I saw.
today? So you have two versions. You have the first draft, and now you also have the second draft. And there's also a newsletter that's up on our website that has some of the same information. This is the budget mailer that the board approved us sending out. This is a proof because we have to have the hearing before we have the final version of it. Even House is helping us with it. It is 6 pages, front and back. And so, did you have a chance to see it? So I'll
When
pass
will
it
this
around
be
to you.
Barb, I'm going to have a small
They're
change
gonna
on the proof.
hopefully go
Remember I said I need to see
tomorrow or
it?
the next day.
The
and it
proof?
can
I
only
said I
be
wanted to see it. I
mailed
had a small-
Between the 3rd and the 10th, so it needs to be
Remember I
at
told you I
your
wanted to
house
change maybe one thing
sometime
on
in
there?
We can't go after the 10th.
Okay,
So, right, so we have not ever done one of these.
Okay.
Our
Approving
point
this.
All
is
right.
to prove that is to continually show
I
that
just
it,
got Fredonia's, which I'll get for my car, so you can see it. Black and white versus color, was it significantly more expensive? Fredonia's
no,
is black and white.
Barb was in on the quotes on this one.
this
right?
was 3,100.
3,100 for over 3,000 copies, 6 pages, full color.
Black and white would have been.
Well, and the black and white would have made it difficult on some of our pie charts. You need a pie. Yeah.
I second that.
If you're going to do it, you got to do it.
Go big or go home.
That's right. Go big or go home.
So, questions about the budget presentation?
Nope.
I like having it show exactly where we are today as opposed to how we got here.
Very nice.
Yeah, I like that.
32 minutes.